optimization is an ongoing process, and it only comes once you have a very clear understanding of how work gets done. Whether it's managing inventory, training a new hire, or executing service, every aspect of your operation relies on process. As chefs and leaders, we often focus on the end results: great dishes, happy guests, and a thriving team. All of that comes from great people. But if you're only focusing on the results, then you're likely to miss the smaller piece. And I'm here to tell you that the key to building a high-performing kitchen starts not with the people, but with the process. In this video, I'm going to guide you step by step through my process of how I define and evolve those smaller processes that drive a team toward success. And I've implemented this exact process with many chefs, but specifically I think of executive chef Andrew Vaughn, because with a clear framework for rolling out and refining processes across his outlets and for developing ideas, Chef Vaughn was able to avoid the chaos and frustration that often accompany unfamiliar territory for the team. By adopting routines like the one in this video, he not only exceeded expectations in quality, but also built stronger trust with his team, becoming more effective in his role as a leader in the eyes of both his staff and his upper management. Now, these systems and strategies are designed to help chefs like you take control of your operation, eliminate inefficiencies, and create a thriving kitchen environment and culture. Whether it's streamlining workflows, improving communications, or building trust within your team, these tools deliver results you can consistently reproduce. If you're searching for a way to organize your experience, develop processes that will immediately improve your operation, and gain access to proven plug-and-play blueprints that streamline your workflows, then I'm here to help. This is what I do every day, guiding chefs to lead with confidence and clarity while packaging your expertise into efficient, effective leadership systems. Schedule a call with me today by using the link below this video, and let's work together to implement these routines so you can run your kitchen with peace of mind, create space for creativity, and deliver consistent excellence with peace and ease. Systems are the foundation for success, but there are 6 steps that we have to optimize before we can reasonably expect others to execute the way that we need. And I deeply believe that building people should be the ultimate goal of any leader. And as I had to learn, before you can truly empower your team, they need to clearly understand the expectations that are laid out for them. And that means laying them out, right? And that means providing them with the tools and frameworks for their success, the roadmap, the path, the expectations. You can't expect others to execute effectively if the processes you're handing them are incomplete, inconsistent, unclear, if the expectation is not communicatable. And whether it's managing inventory, training a new hire, or executing service, every aspect runs and relies on underlying processes. Over the years, it's taken me a long time to figure out the difference between the processes that are defined and the processes that just take place and happen. And if you're blessed to have a team that operates and functions within their processes without much involvement, that's fantastic, until they're not there. And that's a very clear symptom when you're very process driven, but your process lives within one person. And that should be a great motivator to take the time to step back and document and figure out exactly what's going on. Now, when I say document, I'm not encouraging anybody to spend their entire life in the office and draw charts and graphs and do all of that unnecessary BS. What I'm talking about, though, is wrapping our hands around the more complex procedures and things that drive our world so that we can manage them effectively and drive to a desirable outcome with consistent results without crashing the ship. See, the key is to have processes that work not just for you, but for anybody that you delegate them to. That's the key to not being the cornerstone or the keystone in every process. So as promised, let's get into the steps for optimizing processes so that we can remove that complexity and the confusion that can exist when incorporating structure. So now I'm going to break this down into 5 steps. And these are the key steps to optimizing your processes. Step 1. Look from a high level and list the processes that create consistent success, asking yourself what needs to happen. And I want you to get super granular. Get granular with your leaders, get granular with your observations, and understand everybody's role, and then create this rough outline, these steps, these processes, these procedures, everything that goes on through the day. And that'll lead you to creating the first subcategory of the organization that is required to keep us moving through this process. I like to think of that in terms of primary functions. Now, these primary functions don't really change at that level, especially from business to business. So these primary functions are going to make up this first subcategory. And what these primary functions are doesn't really change much from business to business. The how they get done will. And that's why this step is super important. So regardless of the size of your operation and the number of people working for you, primary functions at this first level are broken down into 3 groups. Strategy, where are we going and why? Execution, how are we going to get there? And the people, who's going to make it happen? Think of these 3 as the biggest buckets. And I'm going to spend the majority of our time here on execution because that's where we can make the biggest impact first. From one food service operation to another, the subcategories within execution don't change a whole lot either. We're always dealing with production, service delivery, inventory management, scheduling and labor management, compliance or safety, depending on what word you use, financial performance, workflow, systems management, and communications. Now, to dig deeper into these, we need to go into the day-to-day. So we need to create more subcategories within there and get even more granular and go day-to-day. The best way I've found to thoroughly complete this step is to organize piece by piece, literally as I walk through my day, documenting from the moment that I arrive on property, check the loading dock, look at the trash bins, check the dumpsters, walk into receiving, say hello, check the time clocks, check all of my refrigerators in the storage in the storeroom, check order if it's there, arrive at my office, hang my jacket, switch my keys, turn on my computer, head out in and check the outlets that are open, check the staffing in the outlets that are open, walk the dining spaces, review the event orders, check production sheets, check email. You know your day. You know there's a lot of things that go on, but literally documenting step by step what's going on as you're walking through your day, all the way through to the end, which is going to lead to a list of things that your business or your department, depending on where you're at, does in order to execute each day. And based on the level of responsibility you have, this list is going to be a little bit broader or it's going to be a little bit more narrow. It's easier to do this if it's the first time and it has a narrow scope because you have a narrower number of variables in your field. But don't skip anything. Include everything. I like to do this a couple of passes too. So like from one day to the next, and obviously you'll recognize that over time, there are different things you do at different times of the year, the different times of the quarter, different times of the month. Good example is if you do weekly inventory, it's different from end of the month inventory, which is usually different than end of the year inventory. There's a different level of importance. So, and then documenting and adding these pieces as you go. Creating a Word document and just slowly plugging things in. This process doesn't happen overnight, but it is a clear way to get down all of those little steps and pieces that need to take place. And then, and only then, do you really dive in with your supervisors and then give them the same assignment. Compare lists. The goal is to have this massive list of pieces, of components, right? You're going to narrow it down, but it's much easier to remove than to add. Now, I've already saved you the time by giving you the first 2 categories of how to chop this down, but I want you to spend the time and get in detail to do the groundwork, to do the nitty-gritty work, and get into all of the nooks and crannies and the steps of the day to see the processes that need to be defined. You want to capture all of it, from pre-service prep to post-service cleanup, all of the training protocols, purchasing, and even team communications. It's going to seem a little daunting at first, and that's okay. Try to remember it's just a list, and there's a steady process that comes about once you get into it. And the cool thing is, once you get this done, you don't have to touch it a whole lot unless something breaks. And this list is going to serve as the foundation for everything else mapping and improving each process moving forward. So it's really important. So it literally is a foundational step, and you're going to have to do a lot of rework if you don't do this first step thoroughly. Now, step 2. Next, we need to map each flow line by line in detail. So each one of those pieces is going to have its own flow. It's going to have its own process that's attached to it. So we need to take each item out of that list and map out the flow in detail. What happens first? What triggers the next step? What decision needs to be made? What action needs to be taken? Does it need to be documented? And when you're mapping a process, there's 4 really good questions that you can ask to continue to try and get all of the pieces of it. And that's the who, when, how, and what questions. The who identifies who's involved. The when is the deadline or the trigger points. The how gets into more of the depth. And the what is, well, what takes place, the cause and effect. And if there's different triggers, then it needs its own process. Daily inventory, like I said, is different than weekly inventory, is different than month-end inventory because there's different levels of preparation and they're all going to look different. This mapping step gives you a complete picture of how things work and how things integrate and interact. And it's probably going to give you some recognition of things that work and things that don't. I think of this as flipping on the light switch and illuminating the operation in a very clear light. As you're going through, remember to make notes of the overlaps with other processes, the intersections. Make sure you don't go down the rabbit hole, just make little notes of it. And I like to draw this. And so in order to draw this, there's some standardized symbols that make a world of difference. And that helps make this efficient, right? So there's a series of symbols that are going to be used in order to make this flow chart consistent and easy. The oval works for the start and end points. This hexagon shape works for preparation steps. The diamond shape comes in handy for a decision. The trapezoid shape is when there's a manual operation. There's a documentation step that looks kind of like a torn document. The D, that's what it looks like to me anyway, is the D is when there's a delay or a wait in a process. And then the data input also is a key step. Like these are the most frequently used symbols in this, right? So to make this seem a little bit more sensible, let's use an example. All right, so we have a clear starting point. Then we move on to the next step, which is defining the role. Then we're going to create or publish a post, and then there's a decision point, right? Like it goes yes or no. It either works or it doesn't. If it's a no, we recreate or publish. If it's a yes, then we move on into the next stages, into a positive direction. So then we start our pre-screening process. If it's a yes again or a no, we have 2 different directions that we go in. If it's a yes, we move on to the next step, which is outreach. If it's a no, then we move into our track and then our continue search phase, right? Like, so that track has ended, we need to start our flow back again. So when we start over, we move on to our next candidate, we go through the pre-screen, they become a yes, we move into outreach. Again, there's an opportunity, a yes or a no. The flow continues, right? It terminates if they say no eventually, but it allows us to document the steps through the process. We send a thank you letter, we track them, we continue on with our search, or it's a yes, we move on to the next phase. And this moves us all the way through the entire interviewing process. Yes, there's some replication of what takes place because, well, if they keep saying no, or if we keep deciding that it's a no, then inevitably, well, we don't want the candidate. And that's not the right candidate for the job. Eventually, we end up at the offer. They can accept it or they can decline it, right? That's entirely up to them based on what they choose to do. And if they accept, then we move on and we move forward into our next process, which is onboarding. If they decline, well, then we start over, right? Like, it's just a clear way to document all of the steps and all of the possibilities of the entire process. And that is tremendously relevant. Being able to do that allows us to get really granular and recognize where maybe some of our flaws are in our process. Maybe where we need to refine or we need to kind of review, maybe where we actually need to define a process. Seeing all of those little spots, recognize or identify where there might be flaws, where we might need to address more. And inevitably, longevity or issues in hiring can usually be linked back to a process failure. So that's the first piece, right? Like, use symbols that make a world of difference in documenting and making it easy. Doesn't have to be perfect, doesn't have to be pretty. Always have a start and an end for your process, and then make sure to keep it linear. And when you do that, you're bound to get a much more effective result. It's going to take you a little bit of time to do your first one, but eventually you'll start to get into the rhythm of things. These can get fairly complex, but everything should terminate at some point. Some might be the piece of a bigger process. One process may end and another one may begin, and that's usually the best way, or that's a best sign that you're on the right track. The next step, step 3, take that and assess the process And then dive deeper and complete them. You may notice that once you've mapped this process, you can identify gaps, you can identify inefficiencies. And then as you're looking at it, you may recognize that there's steps missing. You also want to keep an eye out to see if there's any redundancies. If there are, revise the flow to complete the documentation of the process and make sure that you don't have any foolish wastes of energy, effort, or follow-up. You don't have too many people assigned to a task, or that you have the right people assigned to the task. And just make sure that it's done and it flows logically from start to finish. A process isn't truly optimized until it's clear, it's streamlined, and somebody can follow it. Step 4, that next piece, is insert and delete within the process as is necessary. So when you can see the entire process and you've kind of closed all of the gaps and the holes, it's time to edit. And this will be something that always happens. That's why I say it's most important to start with the biggest pieces, the largest contributors to success, which execution is probably the most important stuff, right? Because it leads to the biggest end result. It leads to sales. It keeps the business healthy. So when you have those, you start to insert the steps where they're necessary and delete anything that doesn't add value or efficiency. For example, if 2 people are responsible for the same task, decide which one or which position owns it. You want to keep charts like this tied to a position, not necessarily specifically to a person. When it's tied specifically to a person, then you are tied very specifically to that person. Simplify wherever possible so that you can make this process more efficient. The final step, evaluate the needs that you have in your flowchart and adjust. Step back, have a good clear look at the process as a whole. And then ask yourself, does it work? What needs to change? And make sure that you're testing it. And then having others test them as well. Make sure you're testing them in real world conditions and gather the feedback that they have. See, as I mentioned in the beginning, optimization is an ongoing process, and it only comes once you have a very clear understanding of how work gets done and the difference between big projects, smaller tasks, and a clear flow of how those things come together, linked up in a process to reach an end result. Every time you refine a system, you build a stronger foundation for your team to succeed, and you provide them with a clearer map that ultimately allows you to thrive and have peace of mind that the work that needs to be getting done is, regardless of you being in it or working on it. Eventually, all of your processes will be a piece of a bigger process. This may not be necessary for all things, but it's a nice, clear way to actually see the steps, the holes, the efficiencies, and the inefficiencies without waiting until there's a massive wreckage, without the overwhelming wreckage of a massive failure or miss. If you're ready to develop and implement processes that not only simplify your operation, but also empower your team to perform to their best, let's connect. I've helped chefs all over the country transform their leadership and streamline their kitchens for consistent results. Schedule a call with me today using the link below, and let's start building the structure that drives your success. Now, chefs, we often think leadership is about solving problems on the fly. I know I thought that when I was in the beginning of my career. But true leadership, scalable leadership, is built on systems that remove confusion, create clarity, and set your team up for success, whether you're in it or you're not. By following these 5 steps that I've shared today, you can begin optimizing your processes and creating a culture of consistent excellence in your kitchen. Leadership is not about doing it all. It's about creating an environment where everything works as it should and everyone knows their role. Start small, focus on the areas that matter the most, and remember that every improvement you make builds a stronger foundation for your team to thrive. Now, if you learned something new from this video or got a spark to upgrade your program, be sure to like, subscribe, turn on notifications, and share this with someone else who will as well. Thank you, and I look forward to meeting with you in the next video.